Hello, YouTube. I've been having a lot of Twitter conversations about this lately, and I think there's enough here to justify a video. So, Vice recently posted a video they did with Jordan Peterson. You probably already know who he is, and if you watched this video, you know that I considered him at the time to be a heroic figure. Now I see him more as a motivational speaker and social political figure. And, well, I still think of him as a very brave person, and I agree with a lot of what he says. I don't consider him a personal hero of mine in any real sense. I think overall, the philosophy of life he teaches, the idea of taking responsibility for yourself rather than blaming things on outside influences, that's a philosophy that I have lived by long before I ever heard of Jordan Peterson. I think that's why I have a hard time considering myself a fan of his, because from what I've seen, fans of his are generally people who have found special meaning in their life from listening to him. I haven't found that personally because most of the self-improvement stuff he talks about are things I already do. And when it comes to his moral philosophy and how he thinks the world works and how he wants it to change, I find myself agreeing with a lot of it, but also disagreeing on various specific points. As we go through the Vice interview, that will become apparent. And the reason I've explained my thoughts about Peterson is because in the course of having discussions about him recently, I've noticed a trend. If you see a critic of Peterson, the odds are good that they will at some point misrepresent his views. Now, I don't know why this is. I'm not sure if it's just simple bias or just the way Peterson presents his views maybe invites misrepresentation. I don't know. But you tend to see this happen a lot, people misrepresenting him. And once this happens, you'll see people reply to them either to disagree with the criticism or to try to explain in what ways Peterson has been misrepresented. In either case, the critic will almost invariably assume the person they're talking to is a, quote, Jordan Peterson fanboy, and either dismiss them outright or later use them as an example of how Jordan Peterson's fans think or act. So if the person defending Peterson makes a logic error or acts inappropriately, this can now be used to smear all Peterson fans. And all this is done often without any evidence that the person defending Peterson is even a fan of his. See, there's this idea out there, seemingly shared by most Peterson critics, that the only people who would defend him are his fans. Meanwhile, they go about misrepresenting him and not considering the idea that people like me might be more motivated by correcting misconceptions than by any particular loyalty to Jordan Peterson. And that's the real motivation of this video. I've been seeing more and more among some of the people I follow a very clear misunderstanding of the views Peterson expressed in the Vice interview. I'm going to play you the interview part of the video in its entirety, give my own views on it, and address the areas where I'm seeing people get things wrong. I'm cutting out the first few minutes of the video because it's basically just a description of who he is, although if you go watch it, there's one thing worth noting. So they show two people asking rather odd questions after one of his talks, but they neglect to show Peterson's answers to these questions, leaving us as viewers to guess what Peterson's views would be. I'm noting this because people biased against Peterson are likely to assume he had different views on these questions than people biased in his favor. So this already from the beginning calls into question Vice's motives here in presenting this interview. But anyway, let's take a look at it.
After his sold-out show in New York, I met Dr. Peterson at his home in Toronto. We started off discussing his work, but the conversation quickly veered into something else.
Okay, straight off, there's something to note. We are not seeing the whole interview. We have no idea how long they talked about Peterson's work, but we do know that we're not seeing it. This is relevant because there are areas throughout this interview where it seems like parts of the discussion are missing, and I'll point those out when I come across them.
Who is the target audience? Who are you trying to reach?
Well, partly me, and then partly people who feel that there might be more in them than they're currently manifesting. People who've been fed a nauseating saccharine diet of rights and freedoms for like 50 years with no counterbalance of responsibility. And most people find almost all the genuine meaning in their life in the adoption of responsibility.
Okay, so see how he describes his target audience and compare it to how his critics will describe them. Most will claim he specifically targets young men. In fact, this video did just that when it first described Peterson, but Peterson doesn't target men specifically. It just happens that more men than women so far are interested in his views. And I would wager that this is because it's women who benefit more from the system that he opposes. Moving on.
It seems to me that there's sort of two versions of you that are floating around. The one is the scholarly work that you've done over your career.
Yeah.
And then there's this online version. I mean, do you feel split at all right now?
Fragmented is more accurate than just split. The political split that you're talking about is...
Sorry, I just want to pause here for a moment. Here's the first example of where it seems like we're not hearing the whole discussion. The interviewer asked about a split between his scholarly work and his online persona. But Peterson says, the political split you're talking about. Well, based on what we've seen, the interviewer never mentioned a political split. This doesn't seem to really change the context of what's being said, but I just wanted to note that once again, we're not hearing the whole conversation. Every time the camera angle changes, we could be losing something.
The political split that you're talking about is the humanities at the universities have become intolerably corrupt. They don't teach people to read. They don't teach them to think. They don't teach them to speak. They don't have them read great works. They've become indoctrination factories for a social justice ideology.
I have a personal theory that I wanted to run by you, and it is that college right now and universities are their own ecosystem, and that professors and students both have been sort of trapped in a war of ideas, as you put it.
Sorry, once again, we never heard Peterson mention a war of ideas in this interview. Just more evidence of missing content.
I have a personal theory that I wanted to run by you, and it is that college right now and universities are their own ecosystem, and that professors and students both have been sort of trapped in a war of ideas, as you put it, that keeps escalating. But that once you walk outside the gates of that university, that it seems very contained to the university. What I don't see is sort of this sort of veering towards apocalypse.
Oh yeah, it's spreading into HR, into corporations throughout the US through HR departments very, very rapidly.
Okay, so this is important because this is how we get to the topic of the workplace. But when I start the video again, you'll notice a sudden shift to talking about sexual harassment. And we don't really know how that shift happened. Once again, it looks like we're missing part of the conversation. And the reason I keep noting this is because any criticism of what's been said in this video has to take into account that maybe we're not hearing everything, and maybe there's some context that's been taken out that explains why Peterson says some of the things he says later.
In what ways, though, in a way that is not sort of like, hey,
Well,
how about you
NBC
not grab like the ass of your coworker?
NBC is regulating hugging.
Okay, take note of this. Peterson just brought up an example of a rule in the workplace regarding sexual harassment that he clearly finds ridiculous. NBC regulating hugging. The topic is clearly sexual harassment and how to put an end to it.
Right, and not only that,
do you not feel like that was out of a response of these sorts of stories, like of generations of men sort of taking advantage?
It's not easy to solve a complicated problem, and like ready-made ideological solutions don't work. They just make it worse.
But come on, that's just like a maxim. You're not actually addressing the question, which is like, isn't there harm that is trying to be solved?
There isn't a question. There's a set of questions, and no one's posing them.
This is a part of the video that many Peterson critics have ignored. He is about to suggest an example of a question that no one is posing. He's not suggesting an answer, he's suggesting a question.
Here's a question. Can men and women work together in the workplace?
Yes, I do it.
How do you know?
Because I work with a lot of women.
Right. Well, it's been happening for what, 40 years? And things are deteriorating very rapidly at the moment in terms of the relationships between men and women.
Okay, so he's made two claims here so far. Men and women have been working together for 40 years. Well, I don't think that's accurate, but maybe he means something very specific and Vice has cut that out of the interview. I'm not sure. The other claim is that things have been deteriorating very rapidly, and I think that is accurate. I've seen a number of news articles, for example, talking about how men are avoiding women in the workplace, not mentoring them and not wanting to be alone with them. This is, in my opinion, a clear reaction to the overreach of the Me Too movement, in which women have essentially been encouraged to make accusations of sexual misconduct. The accused man's name is then publicized, his reputation is ruined, and often he's fired. All of this is done with no sense of due process, no way for him to recover his reputation, and often with no legal charges even being filed. And what's worse, accusations of rape are being put into the same category as bad sex or sexual harassment. I've talked in the past about how rape is often lumped in with sexual assault as if they're the same thing. Well, now it's even worse. Sexual misunderstandings are now in the same category as rape. I know of one case, for example, where a prominent wrestling commentator on YouTube named Adam Blampede had his reputation and career ruined because he asked for and received nude images of at least one of his female fans. And this is all happening within the Me Too movement. So we've got Harvey Weinstein on one end being accused of rape and all sorts of sexual misconduct, and at the other end we have somebody consensually receiving nude images, and that's in the same category. So, while I'm not so sure about Peterson's 40-year claim, there is certainly evidence for his claim that relations between men and women in the workplace have been deteriorating recently.
Is there sexual harassment in the workplace? Yes. Should it stop? That'd be good. Will it? Well, not at the moment it won't, because we don't know what the rules are.
Here's another important part. He would like sexual harassment to end. He doesn't think it will. Why? Because we don't know what the rules are. I assume he means the rules regarding sexual harassment. Earlier, he brought up the fact that NBC is regulating hugging. That's a good example of the confusion surrounding the rules. In some workplaces, hugging is not an issue, and it's even normal. In others, apparently, hugging is sexual harassment. Now, it's tempting at this point to offer up your own ideal rules. I'm sure you can think of some great, fair rules for sexual harassment, but getting everyone in society to agree to them is a whole different story, and that appears to be Peterson's point. The ideal rules seem to differ from company to company and from individual to individual. The result is that men in the workplace have no idea how to act around their female coworkers. And until they do know, sexual harassment will never end because men will keep making mistakes just based on confusion, if nothing else.
Do you think men and women can work in the workplace together?
I don't know.
Without sexual harassment?
We'll see.
We'll see. How many years will it take for men and women working in the workplace together?
More than 40.
To get a sense.
I assume that many Peterson critics didn't watch this part, conveniently forgot it, assumed he is lying, or have just misremembered it. Because one of the most common comments I've seen criticizing this video is that Peterson thinks men and women can't work together. Well, as we just heard, he's not sure. He obviously thinks we need more data to make a definitive statement on that, and so far we don't have enough data. In other words, in his view, the jury is still out on the question of can men and women work together without sexual harassment. Not being sure about something is not the same as having an opinion on the thing. So please stop claiming Peterson thinks men and women can't work together. That's not what he said.
We don't know what the rules are. Like what? Here's a rule.
Don't
How about no makeup in the workplace?
Right. Here is the most commonly misrepresented part of the video. I can't even count the number of people who are saying Peterson wants to ban makeup in the workplace. What he's in fact doing is clearly suggesting a hypothetical rule. Remember, the conversation started with him mentioning a ridiculous rule, NBC regulating hugging. His theory is that men and women don't know the rules, so he's giving an example of a rule that could exist. We don't know at this point of the video if he actually agrees with this rule or not, but so far at this point, all we have is a hypothetical suggestion.
Why would that be a rule?
Why should you wear makeup in the workplace? Isn't that sexually provocative?
No.
It's not?
No.
Well, what is it then? What's the purpose of makeup?
Some people would like to just put on makeup.
Why?
I don't know why.
Why do you make your lips red? Because they turn red during sexual arousal. That's why. Why do you put rouge on your cheeks? Same reason.
I mean, look.
How about high heels?
What
are they
What
for?
about high heels?
What about them? They're there to exaggerate sexual attractiveness. That's what high heels do.
All right, here is where I start disagreeing with Peterson. He's acting as though makeup and high heels exist purely to increase sexual attractiveness, and I don't think that's accurate. That may be, say, the evolutionary reason, but that's not why every woman does it, and it's not how it is seen by everyone. So, for example, if you go by an evolutionary perspective, then you could make the claim that men only have sex with women for the purpose of reproduction. But that's not the only reason that men have sex with women. It's the same thing with makeup. I would say that most women wear makeup and high heels because of societal expectations. It's not so much that they're trying to be sexually attractive, but that if they don't wear makeup, they will be seen as intentionally being unattractive. I'm sure many women wear makeup to boost their own self-esteem, their own image of themselves, and they're not really thinking about other people. I'm sure there are many, many different reasons why people wear makeup. However, the part of Peterson's point that I do agree with is if we're going to try to regulate all sexual behavior between men and women in the workplace, then it follows that we would regulate any behavior that affects sexual attraction between men and women. Should women, for example, be allowed to wear low-cut shirts in the workplace? I don't know, but surely this is a sexually provocative thing for a woman to do, right? From what I can tell, Peterson is saying something similar about makeup.
Now, I'm not saying that people shouldn't use sexual displays in the workplace. I'm not saying that.
And here's the part that Peterson's critics wish he never said. I'm going to play it again, just for them.
Now, I'm not saying that people shouldn't use sexual displays in the workplace. I'm not saying that.
I'm not saying that.
Here he is saying, clear as day, that he does not support the rule he just suggested. He very clearly said that wearing makeup is a sexual display. He then says he is not opposed to sexual displays in the workplace. Therefore, he does not support a rule banning makeup in the workplace. Yet over and over again, I see people claiming that he wants to ban makeup in the workplace. This is a lie, and really is the main reason that I wanted to make this video. So please, stop claiming he wants to ban makeup. He doesn't.
But I am saying that that is what they're doing, and that is what they're doing.
Do you feel like a serious woman who does not want sexual harassment in the workplace, do you feel like if she wears makeup in the workplace that she is somewhat being critical?
Yeah,
Okay.
I do think that.
And this is pretty much the only part of the video the critics are getting consistently right. He is indeed claiming it is hypocritical to not want sexual harassment and also to wear makeup in the workplace. So let's examine that claim. A hypocrite is someone who acts contrary to their stated beliefs. So if I say I'm opposed to stealing and yet I steal, I'm a hypocrite. So if I don't want sexual harassment, what would make me a hypocrite? Well, if I did things that encouraged or invited sexual harassment. So if a woman intentionally tries to seduce men and then when they reciprocate she cries sexual harassment, that would be a hypocrite in this case. I don't see, though, how wearing makeup could possibly make a woman a hypocrite if her belief is that she doesn't want to be sexually harassed. I assume, based on this, that Peterson believes wearing makeup is literally inviting or encouraging sexual harassment. And I don't think that's true. However, I think it's worth talking about what makeup actually does with regards to sexual harassment. First off, let's assume if you're a woman and you work with men, your odds of being harassed are not zero. But how high are they? what affects the odds of you being harassed? To determine that, we have to define sexual harassment. So for the purpose of this discussion, let's assume it means clearly unwanted sexual advances or contact. So if a man hugs a woman after she made it very clear that she does not want to be hugged, that would qualify as sexual harassment for the purpose of this discussion. So, what affects your odds? Well, the number one thing would be the men you work with. Are they the type of men who are likely to respect your wishes with regards to sexual advances and contact? Other factors would be workplace culture and societal views as a whole. But another factor to consider is the woman herself. How does she act? Does she act in a way that men might interpret as inviting sexual advances or contact? Does she engage in flirtation, for example? Another factor might be appearance. Does she, to use an earlier example, wear a low-cut shirt? How attractive is she overall? Does she do things like wear makeup that increase her overall attractiveness? All of these things are potential factors. And I don't think it's controversial to say that a more attractive woman is more likely to be sexually harassed than a less attractive one. So it stands to reason that anything that increases a woman's attractiveness will also increase her odds of being harassed. Now, what I'm not claiming is that any one factor increases the odds of harassment to 100%. A woman could show up to work naked and spread her legs on her desk, and she might still not get sexually harassed. Men are not mindless animals that will harass a woman just because she acted sexual, dressed in a certain way, or wore makeup. But for a man who would sexually harass a woman, these factors are relevant in determining his likelihood of doing so. So it stands to reason then that if a woman were truly and completely devoted to never being sexually harassed, she would not do anything to increase her attractiveness. In fact, such a woman would make an effort to seem less attractive. That, I think, might be what Peterson really meant with his hypocrite comment. But we don't really know because any explanation after that statement by Peterson is missing because Vice clearly cut to a different part of the interview after he made that statement. I've tried asking Peterson to explain himself further, but as of the time of this recording, he has not done so. Anyway, so a woman could lower her odds of being harassed by looking less attractive, but it's important to note that her odds will never be zero as long as she works with other people. It's also important to note that I'm not telling women to do this. That's up to them. But I think it's a conversation worth having because right now it seems like the advice out there is not based on reality. See, many people want to see a world in which women can dress and act however they like and yet never be sexually harassed. This would be a nice world, but it's not the world we live in. Despite this, most of the advice out there for women in the workplace seems to assume we already live in this world. And in fact, for some people, the only acceptable advice regarding sexual harassment is directed at men, and it's don't harass women. But that's silly because we don't live in an ideal world. If we did, telling people not to steal would be enough to prevent theft. We don't live in that world, so we advise people to lock their doors, not flash money around, be mindful of their surroundings, etc., etc. The same should be true with sexual harassment. Women should be made aware of the factors that may influence their odds of being harassed, and it should be up to them to decide how far they're willing to go to lower their odds. Most women, I assume, will still choose to make themselves look more attractive, for example, and they are absolutely free to do that, and they should be absolutely free to do that. But they should be doing so with the knowledge that being attractive comes with both benefits and risks. It's like being rich. If you're rich, you're more likely to be targeted by thieves and swindlers. Appearing rich has certain benefits in terms of how most people will treat you, but it also comes with a risk. The same is true for appearing sexually attractive. Yes, most people will be nicer to you and you'll be more successful, but you're also more likely to be targeted by creeps and perverts. Denying that reality doesn't help anyone. But that's my opinion, and it might not be Jordan Peterson's. Jordan Peterson made a claim about hypocrisy, and if we're just judging it on the video, then I think he's wrong. And it really does sound like he's claiming that wearing makeup is basically inviting or encouraging sexual harassment. And I think that's a ridiculous claim. So the criticisms of him, the people mocking him for that claim, are right to do so until he clarifies. Now, let's watch the rest of the interview. Before I play it, though, remember that Peterson is often described as far-right or even alt-right.
One of the things that you've talked about is that a lot of times you talk to these young men who are sort of flirting with far-right ideologies, and you try and bring them back. Like, what is that process like? How do you bring someone back from the far right?
Tell them a better story.
What is the better story?
Grow the hell up. Take your place in the world. You've got something to contribute. Make a plan. Live as an individual. Stay away from the identity politics pathology. It's just an excuse for failing to live your life in a respectable and noble manner. It's a way better story than like go wave your idiot far-right flag at some rally with a bunch of pasty-faced morons. What kind of pathetic behavior is that? So it's time to grow the hell up.
Yep, he sure sounds like an alt-right supporter. Yeah, right. Remember this video the next time you see him described as a far-right thinker or an alt-right leader.
Are you worried at all that you're sort of attracting a crowd that you might not want to attract?
No, I'm not. I'm worried always that I'll make a mistake in what I say. Impulsive mistake, careless mistake, that I won't be on top of things in a combative interview, that sort of thing. And then I'll make a mistake. I've been worried about that almost to the exclusion of everything else for the last 15 months. But I'm not worried about the impact of what I'm doing because the evidence is overwhelming that it's positive. Thank you.
And that's another area I agree with Dr. Peterson. Yeah, he may say some things I disagree with, but I think so far the good outweighs the bad. I don't really care that he's a religious person, for example, because I'm not an anti-theist. I don't care that he has many cult-like fans because that's common among any popular public figure, especially ones that give advice on how to live life. What I care about is that he's providing a perspective in the public that is sorely needed in society, and that's a perspective that emphasizes personal responsibility and talks about the dangers and negative aspects of ideological belief. So is he my personal hero? No. Am I a Peterson fanboy? No. But I do agree with him a lot, and I think overall he's a force for good in the world. And I hope so am I. So until next time, I'm Positive Improvement, and I wish you all the best.